All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Valiant hosted webinar series, Leadership Strategies for the Security Guard Industry. My name is Christy Hopper, and I'm the marketing manager here at Valiant, as well as your moderator for today. We're excited to have Jack Goldsboro on hand to enlighten us on some leadership strategies and, most importantly, how to successfully navigate profitably in a tightening labor market. So Jack comes to us with over 45 years of experience in the industry as a proven thought leader and management skills specialist. So we're really happy to have him lend his expertise to us and the audience. But before we begin, I wanted to just go over a couple of webinars, how-tos, and a little bit about Valiant's role in the security guard industry, okay? So on the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see your webinar guest panel. Click the double arrow button to hide or show the panel, and feel free to pose questions to Jack or myself in the questions box. We'll try to answer questions as we go along, but if we can't get to them in the moment, we'll wrap it up with some questions at the end. All right, so just a quick recap on Valiant. So Valiant has over 25 years of experience supporting the guard industry with workforce management software. We currently serve around 1,500 clients in the US, Puerto Rico, and Canada. And we're especially proud of our payroll and time and labor management software because it specifically supports scheduling, time collection, reporting for the security guard industry. In addition, we make it a point to staff up with folks like Jack to ensure you've got access to somebody who knows the industry inside and out. So that's part of the reason why we're having this webinar, and again, why we're excited to have Jack share some of his expertise with us as well as the audience. So without further ado, I'm going to invite Jack to kick it off, okay? Again, if you have any questions, please, by all means, you're more than welcome to ask them while the webinar is going on. If we can't get to them while it's going on, we'll absolutely try to address them at the end, okay?
Thanks, Christy. Good afternoon and morning to some of you in the West Coast. And thanks again for taking your time to join us for this. In today's session, we're going to review the key factors causing the tightening labor market conditions as they're affecting the security guard industry and their impact on employee availability, retention, and turnover, which in turn is causing pressure on your businesses to raise wages and benefits. To address this, we'll discuss HR employment practices and the need to update and maintain competitive compensation levels to avoid losing quality employees. And finally, we'll cover the basics for recovering cost increases while preserving and hopefully in some cases leveraging higher prices for increasing your margins. Hopefully these steps will further support you in your efforts to use value-added strategies in your contract negotiations for price increases, and hopefully help shift away from the perception of being a commodity service. We're going to cover more of that in detail in part 2 of our series session. I'm sure you're all aware and probably feeling the impact of the labor market, which has been tightening in virtually all areas of the US market. Let's look at 4 of the key underlying reasons for this. The economy is now growing faster, with GDP in the last 3 quarters of 2017 growing at 2.9% versus 2.2% in the prior year. The unemployment rate in March 2018, just last month, dropped to 4.1%. It's been running that for the last 3 months or so. But for the comparable period back in March of 2010, it was 9.9%. So that's a very dramatic drop in the unemployment, and we're seeing that. The third factor is the continuing increases in state minimum wages, and we're going to deal with that in just a few minutes. And last, we're seeing an increasing trend of regulations at the state and local level. Frankly, security guard businesses in the United States have relatively enjoyed the advantages of a lower economy running under 2% for the last 10 or 15 years. And based on that, I think most of the companies have realized some of the benefits of having employees with higher skills or even overqualified skills because they couldn't find other opportunities in the marketplace. That scenario is gone. Today we have the reverse, a faster growing economy with lower unemployment and tightening labor conditions, especially in the service sectors. Ironically, with a faster growing economy, which should be a great opportunity for new business sales growth, is putting a greater challenge on us for staffing the businesses for that new growth. So it's no surprise that guard pay has been rising. In January, the Bloomberg News Service reported that despite the lowest employment rate since 2000, wages for American workers rose at a relatively modest pace last year. For security guards, however, it's a different story. Average hourly earnings for employees in security and protective services jumped 17% in the 13-month period through November of last year, compared with a 2.5% increase for all the rest of the US private sector workers. So there's a substantial difference that we can see here. The question is why? So the first is, of course, the faster economic growth is producing more security jobs, which increases demand. At the same time, declining unemployment rate is reducing supply. The third and very significant factor has been the increase in state minimum wages. In 2017, 22 states increased their minimum wages. They include Arizona, Alaska, Arkansas, California, Colorado, Connecticut, Florida, Hawaii, Maine, Maryland, Massachusetts, Michigan, Missouri, Montana, New Jersey, New York, Ohio, Oregon, South Dakota, Vermont, Washington, and Washington, D.C. In 2018, many of those states increased their wage levels, minimum wage levels again. And also the state of Rhode Island was added. In addition to that, in some municipalities, minimum wages have been increased. Examples are Portland, Oregon, and of course, New York City. Another factor has been in certainly major metropolitan markets, the increased trend for unionization with very, very burdensome collective bargaining agreements. And I think the last point we think, just to repeat from a prior slide, one of the factors is the loss of overqualified guards who have been in our security guard business ranks only because they've been waiting for higher paying jobs. That trend is continuing or the industry, I should say, is continuing to lose those kinds of folks to higher paying industries right now, which is causing the further effect on the guard pay increases. So let's switch for a minute to the legislative and the regulatory side of this. Despite the Trump administration's efforts, which I think we all appreciate, to roll back Obama-era regulations, certainly in the major sectors such as finance, healthcare, the Environmental Protection Administration, the security industry is experiencing actually the opposite effect, particularly at the state and local levels, and further particularly in the blue states and major cities. At the federal level, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, TCJA, was passed in December. However, many of the Trump administration's other employment-related regulatory and legislative initiatives haven't really been finalized or become effective. Examples, Department of Labor. We all are aware of the Obama-era change in the overtime rules. Well, That's being worked on, and hopefully we're going to see some rollbacks or a reduction in some of that. Trump administration is also working on changes to the Affordable Care Act, but because it couldn't be repealed, a lot of those things have to be done by executive order on the regulatory side rather than legislative side. I think we're also going to be seeing important changes in unionization rules with the NLRB and EEOC, but those haven't changed yet. On the state and local side, though, in addition to minimum wage changes, we're also seeing very, very punitive efforts in many states, such as California, with the meal and rest break rules and paid leave rules. States are also picking up on the concept of predictive scheduling, which is affected in certainly New York, Oregon, and other states. We're also seeing the complexities of now what is called preemption, which deals with the supremacy clause or doctrine, where states under preemption have the right to oversee and overturn local laws and regulations, and at the federal level, federal laws can preempt state level regulations. That is getting and going to get even further more complicated, affecting a lot of the things that are going to be addressed in our industry. The other thing we've seen already is restrictions on vetting procedures, certainly including drug testing and the information we are allowed to request in our application process. Just as a general comment, as each of these have a potential effect on your businesses, and I'm sure you're doing this, but I would urge all of you to participate actively in state or local associations, whether it's industry associations or employment associations, and also consider retaining a law firm specializing in labor and employment law, because you need to really keep abreast of all of these changes in these areas for reasons we're going to get into in a second. So that said, I think it's understandable that as labor supply decreases in the security market, qualified employees are becoming more valuable. So we're going to focus for a few minutes on the importance of sound HR, employment, and compensation practices. And as we've seen already, one comment come in. It's been a long time since the industry has really faced the acute pressures of low unemployment and high opportunity growth during the same periods. This was especially true in the late 60s and early 70s, and then again in the late 90s going to early 2000s, but shifting between the Clinton and Bush administrations. So instead of what we're seeing now isn't just being concerned about the morale issues. Many of you guard employers are now focusing on the quality of the employee's work experience. We're seeing that, for instance, on the scheduling side. People are looking for ways to offer the guard employees more options and choice and flexibility in their work schedules. So the key important thing here is focusing on appropriate HR, employment, compensation practices to really foster employee satisfaction and retention, and avoiding, obviously, turnover, especially losing valuable employees to the competition. Certainly the last thing we want. So I think a quote from the industry leader is very instructive here. Recently, Steve Jones, the CEO of the industry's largest U.S. security guard company, Allied Universal, doing $5.5 billion in annual revenues, was recently quoted by a periodical called Fierce CEO last month. And the punchline is, to quote, our biggest challenge is people, recruiting and hiring the right people. So the point here, of course, is that even the top companies are not immune or unaffected from the tightening labor market. And they're going to continue focusing their efforts on recruitment and staffing. And many of those efforts are going to be at the expense of smaller companies, perhaps your companies as well. So this can't be a higher importance for everybody's focus to see what we can do in this area. So let's take a few let's take a few minutes and discuss some of the key suggested practice areas. The first thing I would emphasize is the importance of analyzing your turnover, including conducting exit interviews. You really need to understand the reasons and the causes for employees leaving. You can't solve the problem if you haven't defined it. The second thing I would suggest strongly is conducting satisfaction surveys. I would include both the employee surveys and client surveys. On the employee side, you really want to know what is their experience? What are their worksite preferences? What are their issues? What are the reasons that they might consider going elsewhere? On the client side, you really want to get their feedback on the employee performance issues and their effect at the particular worksite. In addition, you always want to conduct periodic employee appraisals. In the old days, that used to be annual appraisals. A lot of companies are finding more effective ways to do that more frequently in a less formal setting. But the important thing here is to benchmark key performance indicators with all employees, making sure that you set goals for improvement areas with the employees and review those and review the employees' performance against those goals. That way, you're staying more in touch with the employee, and the employee understands that he's being, or he or she is being reviewed and recognized for performance. So you also want to ensure other best practices in HR and human capital management programs are really being observed. On the recruiting side, it's really, really important to use all the mechanisms today in social media and employee referrals to capture all potential qualified employees that you need to have to maintain an applicant flow to fill vacancies. Onboarding processes, you really need to make sure you're inventorying all the relevant attributes from the key employees that you're hiring, including education, experience, training, skills, certifications, and other special capabilities for those employees or applicants. That might include, for instance, people who have work experience in vertical industries that are matched up with yours. If you're in specializing in providing security in the real estate or property management field, obviously you want to recruit for and find people who have skills and prior experiences in that kind of a prior industry setting. And of course, the last thing I would strongly recommend is your ability to maintain strong employee communications, open communications. There's a variety of ways to do that, but if the employees understand that you are making the attempt to recognize their efforts and listen to their issues, I think that's going to be very important for you. On the compensation side, I think there's two very important steps that we need to talk about for a minute. The first is, I think, if you haven't done this recently, you need to survey and maintain up-to-date local wage and benefit data. And that would include all of your service areas. Obviously, it includes especially competitive accounts in your areas where possible, certainly because they can be your future accounts. If they're not already prospective, you want to know exactly what's going on with those accounts. But this would include also accounts you might have in remote areas or branches. So you need to make sure that you really have a handle on what is going on around you, including what's happening on your client sites, being mindful of the wage and compensation practices that your clients are observing, so that you can follow some of the concerns that they might have in the same respect. Once you've completed those surveys, you really need to compare that against your current programs and determine what wage and benefit levels or are required or might be needed to increase wages and benefits, so that you can retain and maintain the quality of employees you need to properly service those operations. And I think you need to do that for projecting for at least a 1 to 2 year period, because that's what you're going to be needing to forecast or project in your contract negotiations for pricing increases. I'd also special note here that your ability to explain the labor conditions in your market is going to be extremely important in your ability to sound credible in negotiating pricing increases. You really have to know or have the ability to have a handle on all of the aspects of your labor market conditions in discussing this with your client. This is essential from my perspective in being able to successfully negotiate higher value-added pricing, which we're going to get to in the end of this session and part 2. Having said that, we're going to take a look now at the financial side of the house, and we're going to start by looking at a breakdown of a P&L structure to illustrate the profile of a typical guard contract company with 200 employees and billing of 5,600 hours a week, with an average bill rate of $18 an hour and an average pay rate of $12 an hour. That would be a direct labor ratio of 67%. So we're going to start through and look at some of the cost components. As I said, this is a summary presentation of collapsing all of the major line items. Pardon me for a second, I lost some power. It's collapsing all of the detailed line items, but I'd like to talk about a couple of them for a minute. In the payroll, we're going to get to on the next slide. And payroll, taxes, insurance, of course, includes FICA, FUTA, SUTA, workers' comp, general liability, disability if you have it in that particular state. Employee benefits are inclusive of health care and any other employee benefits. Fixed costs include all of your non-bill staff overhead, payroll, rent, and associated operating costs that are not directly chargeable to the client. So in this particular case, you're seeing where what we're calling EBITDA on an annual basis is $124,000, or 2.4% of annualized revenues of $5,267,000. It's important that we look at our P&Ls on both a dollar basis as well as a ratio basis, and also on a basis of per hour billed. We always measure costs on a per hour billed basis because hours billed are the basis or recovery, how we recover our cost. The other thing I would mention here is that we're using EBITDA as the key metric. EBITDA is a metric used to measure operating performance of profitability because it doesn't include financing or accounting or tax considerations. And obviously you should know, if I'm sure you do, multiples of EBITDA are now used as the primary valuation measurement in the acquisition and sale of guard companies. So that is the primary metric that we need to focus on. We're going to talk about a few other metrics as we proceed further. Oops, there we go. I said that we would look at the payroll line for a minute. In the example that we had on the prior slide, we're looking at a company with it's billing an average of 5,600 hours a week with an hourly base billing rate of $18 and an hourly pay rate of $12. But we're going to talk about what is called an hourly effective rate. And the hourly effective rate is all of the costs that are billed and recovered in billing, which includes, in this case, billable overtime. We used an assumption that 1% of our hours are billable at overtime. So that creates a 9-cent an hour increase in our billing. On the pay side, of course, that includes our other payroll assumptions, which includes, in this example, 3% unbillable overtime and also non-billed hours, a factor of 5% for training, payroll, paid time off. So in this particular case, using those assumptions, we can see that the weekly hours have 295 unbilled hours, showing which creates a difference of 87 cents an hour over the base hourly rate. This is extremely important as we look at pricing going forward and the ability to recover pricing. So using that format and those assumptions, we're now going to look at what is the effect of applying a $1 across the board increase for all 5,600 hours for that particular company. And in this case, we can see that we increased the payroll base rate from $12 to $13. And the effect of this actually results in an increased overall cost of $359,000. So if you look down at the EBITDA line, if we didn't recover any of those dollars, our EBITDA went from 124,000 positive, or 2.4%, to a loss of 234,000, or a loss of 4.5% of revenues, and a per hour loss of 81 cents an hour. And obviously that's not what we want to have occur. So in this case, what we've done to make the model simplified is to add the $359,000 to revenue to recover the whole dollar of our prior EBITDA contribution. So this results, by adding that amount, this results in a new revenue per hour of $19.32, an increase of $1.23 on the effective rate against the payroll effective increase of $1.07. So when we look at that increase and we go to the bottom, we see we've now recovered and restored the EBITDA level at a dollar level of 124,000, or 2.2%. But we see that we didn't recover the full 2.4% that we had before. That's because the increased revenue against the same dollar EBITDA had some dilution effect. And this is the key point we want to make. To avoid this dilution, we really should be using the prior ratio as a reciprocal to recover that difference of 3 cents an hour. So we're going to see this in the next slide. Oops. Okay. So we're going to try to demonstrate this pricing effect on a 168-hour job where we have a lead guard for 40 hours a week at $16 pay and a bill rate of $22.86 for a labor ratio of 70%. The guards at 128 hours a week with an average bill rate of $12, a bill rate of 18, a 66% labor ratio, and a total, or what we call blended rate on 168 hours of a blended rate of $12.95 an hour on the pay side and $19.16 on the bill rate. So using this same P&L cost assumptions from the prior model, which included hourly overhead of $2.27 an hour, excuse me, the above pricing produces an annualized EBITDA level or contribution of $3,300 or 2%. So now we want to look at, and there's our $3,300 and there's our 2%. So that looks like an ideal model for this pricing. We now want to look at those first two line items and break that down a little further as we get into the next step of this pricing. So the lead guard goes from $16 to $17.25 an hour in our price increase, or a $1.25 increase of 7.8%. The guards go from 12 to 13, or $1 an hour, which is an 8.3% increase. And again, on a blended basis, the blended rate is going from $12.95 to $14.01 an hour. So these wages are going to manifest themselves in cost increases, and we're now going to look at three different levels of how we're going to recover this cost. So remembering that the original pricing on an effective rate was paid at $13.89 and the effective bill rate was $19.25, which gave us the $3,300 EBITDA. Our first level of recovery would be if we just increased or recovered the direct payroll costs without payroll taxes or any of the additional effects on non-billable overtime and so forth. So to do that, the pay rate, the effective pay rate would be $15.30, and the new effective bill rate would be $20.31. The bill rate of $20.31, however, would only yield an annual EBITDA of $1,100 versus the $3,300. So we'd be losing almost $2,200, and our EBITDA ratio would go from 2% to 0.6%. If we go to the next level of recovery, we recover all payroll costs plus payroll taxes, we essentially get back to the whole dollar EBITDA level of $3,300. But notice again, because of dilution, the EBITDA ratio is now 1.8% instead of 2%. If, on the other hand, we use a reciprocal factor to use the same 2.4%, the same 2% that we had before we gave the increase, the new billing rate would have to be $20.59 or $1.34 or 7% increase. But instead of the $3,300 EBITDA level, we've now got an EBITDA of $3,500 or $36 roughly $3,600. We've increased EBITDA by $297, which I think is the objective here. So when we look at this on an overall P&L basis, we can see that the effect has given us now an annualized revenue for this 168 account of $179,000 and a new EBITDA level of $3,600 at 2% or 41 cents an hour. So I think in a summary sense, you get the effect of what we're trying to communicate here is the importance of recognizing all your costs and using the mathematics to make sure in your pricing mechanisms and models that you're ensuring your full recovery. That's the objective, of course. So in the we've basically used most of our time. I'd just like to recap a couple of oh, sorry, I went too fast. So what we've covered in the past few 30 minutes or so is that with tightening labor market conditions and continuing legislative and regulatory burdens being imposed on our industry, we need the best practices to maintain our workforce, to maintain our retention of our employee workforce so that we can compete in this marketplace. Secondly, as owners and managers, we recognize it's very important to remain up to date on labor market conditions and prevailing wages and benefits in your local markets. This is essential prerequisite for being able to negotiate higher value-added pricing. And finally, we've just touched on how pricing strategies really must recover all the increased wage and benefits costs, and where possible, maintain EBITDA ratios to avoid dilution. And I think those are the three key messages I hope we've conveyed in this presentation. So in our next session, we're going to use this platform of strategies and demonstrate how to use the employee retention in value-added pricing, how to further use that to further differentiate your services from competition. We're going to touch on various tactics and strategies for negotiating unscheduled price increases with clients, which is always a difficult subject. We're going to review other negotiation options, such as multi-year contracts, wage tiers, progression plans, and discount strategies. And we're going to have some other proven successful strategies and tips for maintaining your profitability going forward in this environment. So with that, I would say thanks for joining us, and we'll turn it back to Christy.
Thanks so much, Jack. I really appreciate it. Valiant really appreciates your time and efforts to share the valuable information with us, and I'm sure the audience does as well. So I'm glad everybody could join us today. And for anybody that would like an opportunity to review Jack's webinar, we're going to be distributing a recording for you shortly. But first things first, Jack, I did have a question for you regarding everything that you kind of just covered. In your experience, what markets would you suggest our listeners focus their attention on, i.e. like schools, commercial real estate, et cetera?
Well, thanks, Christy. Obviously, because of the shooting in Florida, which we're all still very concerned about, we'd be crazy not to look at opportunities to follow into that market with good, sound security practices for not only local schools, but obviously colleges and universities, any campus environments, and including corporate campus environments where similarly they're affected by incidents of potential workplace violence. I would also say, though, we should be looking at your existing makeup of the profile of your own businesses. I would strongly encourage you to take a step back, look at what markets you're in, are those markets where the demand for services are heading? If you're not, maybe you should consider strategies of how you can adjust your capabilities and service offerings to better suit the areas where security is more in demand.
Great, great. It's good advice. Okay, so I think that's it. That's it for today. We definitely want to wrap it up and give everybody a little bit more time back in their day. I just wanted to make a quick correction on one of those slides. It had said the 12th. Part 2 is actually going to be on May 10th. Everybody should keep an eye out for any invites that are going to come through their inbox and their social media. So if you have any questions, this is our contact information. You can always connect with Valiant. Please do follow us on social media. We always post updates, and we also share other security guard related content. And of course, if you want to connect with Jack, his email is available there. So again, have any questions, please reach out. We'll always have an answer for you. And if we don't have it, we'll get it for you. So for any questions that we didn't get to today, we're going to be addressing them on part 2 as well. So keep an eye out again for those invites and sign up. Also share this with your network as we distribute the recordings. We encourage everyone to share this with anyone they know that might benefit from it, as well as reach out to us if they'd like to be on the mailing list for the invite for part 2. Okay, so thanks again, Jack. I really appreciate it. Thank you everyone that attended today. We're definitely looking forward to part 2 and hope to see everybody there on May 10th. All right, have a great afternoon, everyone, and thank you.